If you've chosen Ableton Live as your computer music production software, it's likely that you're looking to create music using your MIDI keyboard and controller. Let's take a look at how to set up those devices to work with Live. So if you're following along on your setup, I've just got a default set open, and let's go to Preferences. And let's do that by key command this time. So that's going to be Command, comma if you're on a Mac, or Control, comma if you're on a PC. All right, so once you've got Preferences open, you're going to want to drop down to the Link Tempo MIDI tab and click that. And we're looking for the MIDI area here and the MIDI ports area. So let's start with the MIDI area. Now, many of the third-party manufacturers out there are working with Ableton closely to create devices that are tightly integrated with Ableton. So there's all kind of special features on the hardware side and in Ableton that work together and allow control or triggering from the device. So those devices are referred to as Ableton native devices, and you can set those up to work with Ableton starting in this MIDI area. So if you click one of these pop-up menus, you'll see these devices listed here. So you simply just need to click select your device, and then once you've got that, you'll go to the input and output columns and enable them there as well. Now you might ask why? Well, because there's actually multiple options. So when I click on the SL Mark III options that I have here, you'll notice that I've got just basic MIDI, this in control thing, and then SL from a DIN1. That is an actual MIDI port on the back of the SL Mark III. But the one option here that closely works with Ableton is this in control option. Now, how did I know that? Well, I had to dig into the user guide for the SL Mark III and find out what are the specific things that I need to do within both the software setup in Ableton and on the device itself to take advantage of all this stuff. So I've chosen the SL Mark III in control option, and I've done the same thing on the output. Now, lower here, we have the MIDI ports area, and this is really important as well. And especially if you don't have a native controller, but your device reads the core MIDI on Mac or on PC, it will show up down here. And then you can choose how that's going to be able to interact with Live by the boxes that you enable in the track, sync, remote, and MPE columns. So if you enable the related checkbox in the track column, that's going to allow you to do basic things like send MIDI notes from your keyboard into Ableton. So you're going to want to enable that for sure. Then the next column that I would look to would be the remote column. Now, if you've got knobs and other kinds of continuous controllers on your devices and you want to be able to use those to control things in Live, then you're going to want to make sure that that column is enabled. For example, let's test out the track and remote columns. So if I hit a key on my keyboard, we should see the MIDI input indicator in the upper right-hand corner that I'm pointing at here light up. And we do see that. And we also see on this one MIDI track that's record enabled, we also saw signal there as well. So I know that the track column is working for my keyboard. Now I also have this launch control set up here, and I've got the remote column on that one. So for example, if I grab a fader number 3 here on that, yep, that's working. And just to double check, let me grab a pan knob and I'll turn that. Yep, the pan knob is working. So those kinds of knobs and sliders on my controller are enabled because I've got the remote column enabled here. Now, the sync column is good if you're using external sequencers of some kind. Now, my Novation SL Mark III actually has an onboard sequencer. And so that's why I've got the sync button checkbox is enabled here. And I'll point out that if any of these checkboxes are enabled, you'll also see this external option light up here, or actually appear here on the control bar. And you'll see this indicator here lighting at a regular interval. That's basically the clock information that Ableton is going to send to this external sequencer when we hit play in Ableton, or if I click the play button here, it's going to send a start message and then clock message to let the external sequencer know to start and how fast to play. And then when we click stop, it'll also send a stop message. The last column here, MPE, is a new option, and that's for MIDI polyphonic expression. And you have to have a keyboard that's capable of that. And none of the devices that I have connected right now are able to do that. But this is a new option, as I mentioned, that allows us to send polyphonic expression for certain kinds of MIDI signals that allow you to do per key MIDI signals. So for example, you can send pitch change information on a per key basis. So if you're playing a chord and you want notes within that chord to bend differently, well, you can do that using MPE. Okay, now that our MIDI devices are set up, all of our external devices are ready to work with Ableton.